Welcome to the Drill Down, in-depth answers to oilfield questions. I'm John Spears.
And I'm Richard Spears, and congratulations, my dear brother. You had...
Yet another birthday.
You did. You survived against all odds.
Yes, and you know how much I like things that go fast, right?
Oh, God.
So I got to tell you that I got home the other day and my wife had something waiting for me. You want to know what it was?
Yeah, can't wait.
Because it goes from 0 to 200 in 2 seconds.
Blender.
Bathroom scales.
Well, as you know, I was doing research during the entire month of September.
Yes.
And I need that scale plus another 10-pounder. So please.
Well, we'll keep that in mind.
Research. For the IRS who's listening in.
There you go.
It was research.
So now that you're back, I thought it would be interesting for us to talk about a newly released report. I mean, it just came out today from the Energy Information Agency, so the U.S. Department of Energy, and it's their forecast of global oil and gas energy use to 2050. So
a lot of people have always relied on this particular report because, for better or worse, it is a government source, and so it tends to be it's in place for a long time. You can go back and look at what they said.
Right. Absolutely.
And so there you go.
That's right. And 30-year outlook has some value to some folks, but I thought it would be interesting to look at what their reference case talked about, because they run a couple of different scenarios. But their reference case is, I think, enlightening. So what would you say that your average guy in the street thinks is the future for oil and gas use over the next 30 years?
Well, having just been in Europe for a month, living here in the United States, and the only news you hear, the only the word you hear from so-called on high is that oil production, oil demand has peaked, and it's on the decline. And that's the word you get.
The world's trying to push to net zero emissions by 2050, right? So,
you bet. And we're going to get there by doing renewables. There's not going to be a hydrocarbon molecule consumed and right away. Electric cars.
Well, certainly not for emissions purposes. So that's why I think it's fascinating to look at this International Energy Outlook forecast, because over the next 30 years, under the assumption that there are that current laws and regulations stay in place. Okay, so the current policies stay as they are.
Okay.
Then
nothing's outlawed.
That's right.
Oil and gas isn't outlawed.
There clearly have been any number of proposals made. There's been promises made and so forth. But in terms of following it up with actual laws, actual regulations, and so forth, not so much the case. So when you just look at what is in place,
status quo,
and assume that will stay the way.
Yeah, because we're at 100 million barrels a day, roughly, or a little less. But for round numbers, 100 million today. What's it say?
Oil use goes up by 25% over the next 30 years. Gas use goes up by 30% over the next 30 years. So now this is in the context of total energy use goes up by about 40% over the next 30 years.
Because that's what happens.
Yeah, population growth and so forth is assumed to continue. So yes, in that scenario, then oil and gas lose a little market share, but there's still an absolute growth that's pretty significant.
I got it. So the overall pie is growing. The share of the pie shrinks a little bit. But again, I'm no good at math, but if we've got 100 million barrels a day today, then how many years in the future?
Yeah, this is 2050, right.
So that's, in round numbers, 25 or 30 years from now, we're up to 125. And so that percent per year, that's a 1% per year growth.
Rounded, 1%.
Which to me, it reminds me of the growth we saw over the last 25 years. Forget the year of COVID.
Right, yes. Yeah.
But that's what it's been.
20-year arc, we've averaged a touch over 1% per year growth in oil use anyway.
Great.
Roughly twice that rate of growth on gas side. So this is
and it grows until then. It grows for 20.
Now it's a 30-year forecast, so there's never any cycles in. So it's not we can't expect it to be a continual growth. But point is that what I think that really tells us a couple different things. I think one thing to focus on is that we really do need then to pay attention to the laws and regulations that the industry has to work inside. It really can't just be, it's not going to be what the headlines say necessarily, or what the op-eds in the paper are all about. This is, we really need to pay attention, as an industry, we need to pay attention to changes that might then, be made that would presumably have a direct impact on the use of oil or gas. So that's the thing, that those actions have not been taken yet. This is really what this tells me. Those kind of actions that might hold energy, oil and gas use flat, or perhaps push it lower, those kind of actions haven't been taken yet. So.
I was in Oklahoma City yesterday at one of the facilities of one of our companies, and it's related to drilling tools.
Yes.
And, talking to the guys, and the question was, what's the outlook for the company and what's the outlook for the industry? And I said, this industry, as we all know, is about as hated as any sort of big industry, global industry can be. But I said, you don't pay attention to that, because the people who hate you the most and the people who love you the most are going to use more tomorrow than they use today. And what the EIA, is it the EIA?
EIA, yes.
So what the EIA is saying, or sort of proving on a piece of paper, is that, that's true. And oh, by the way, if you're 30 years old now, you're going to be 60 years old before the thing peaks out, if this particular forecast works.
Again, there's always a possibility, right? And there's certainly a lot of push being made to enact laws and so forth that would, bend the curve, right?
Yeah.
But again, those by and large have not happened. They haven't certainly happened in the places that are really going to drive energy use forward, which is mostly East Asia, China, Eastern Hemisphere kind of stuff.
The big ones. Again, I was in Europe, and I have to keep saying that so that I can write part of the trip off.
Yeah.
But my observation was that Europe and Europeans are consuming every bit as much of a hydrocarbon as they ever have, ever since I was a student there, whatever it was, 45 years ago.
So if you're just the man in the street walking around, looking around, nothing much has changed.
No, the cars are, the streets are packed, companies are, working, there's not this quietness of things having stopped and people riding their bikes. And oh, by the way, I saw fewer electric cars in Milano than I saw in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Well, I should point out that this forecast that we've been talking about doesn't, it does show that renewables will grow significantly over the next 30 years.
Okay.
So it's not like they're denying that's going to happen. Renewables go up by 165% or something like that.
Okay, so
they
double.
Right, yeah. So there's a much more than double, 165. Oh, yes, they almost triple.
No, that would be triple. Right, 100% would be double.
Yeah. So there's clearly a lot of push, and that can be seen in this outlook for energy demand. But point being made that it's not the days of the oil and gas business are not quite behind us.
So let's put some dollar numbers on that, because we have this flagship report of ours, the Oil Field Market Report.
Yes.
And if you, it peaked out, the biggest year of spending on oil field equipment and services that there ever was right around $500 billion.
That's right. It was around 2013, something like that.
Yeah, 2013, 2014. And during that year, the globe managed to raise its oil production by 2 million barrels a day.
That's a good question. 2 to 3 million barrels a day. Yes.
All right. So like $500 billion got
we raised
an extra
production capacity. To be specific, we were increasing production capacity by about that much.
All right. So you get a year like this one,
right,
and the number's more like $200 billion being spent on drilling holes in the ground, completing wells, keeping the production going.
Right.
And that $200 billion is getting you, what, sort of flat year-to-year production?
I would say that globally anyway, we're not looking at production capacity growth at all this year. So $200 billion is just enough to sort of maintain output. We're offsetting the natural decline perhaps from fields, but certainly not adding to it in a substantial way.
So if
even a minimal way, really.
Yeah. So if you think about it, and you just take those two numbers, $200 billion gets you flat. $500 billion
Yeah.
gets you a 3% growth.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more, but yeah, okay.
So,
gotcha.
so the question is, how many billion are we talking about in order to affect
Yes.
this 1% per year growth? Because it's not 200 billion plus 1%.
No.
It's
Right.
What do you
Yes.
think the number
Yeah,
is?
so if you look back over 2016, 17, 18, and 19, so prior to the pandemic, right?
Yep.
Industry that we're talking about here, spending averaged around $250 billion a year. And so, you could think about that period of time as maybe a reference point as to the kind of activity that was needed to allow for, 1-ish% growth in global oil consumption. So, that provided the resources that were available then to meet the demand that was growing at 1% a year. So something tells me that maybe 250 billion
Yep.
is the is sort of a starting point to think about what the spending number might be.
So last year, during the COVID year, that $200 billion was just a little bit lower, but it wasn't a whole lot lower than it was. And what I wonder is whether we can look at the $200 billion per year spend rate on oil field equipment and services as kind of a floor.
Right.
And what you're really talking about is a $250 billion a year spend rate over, a multiple year period, recognizing that some years you'll get 300 billion or 350 billion, maybe 400 billion, and then you'll get the $200 billion a year.
It's an interesting point because you could sit there and say, what do we think we know about how fast do fields decline?
Yeah.
Natural decline rates, you get all kinds of numbers, 2%, 6%, they're kind of things. So let's say, okay, the number's 4% decline rates, right?
All right.
So $200 billion offsets a 4% decline rate. So that's right, $50 billion per 1%, as it were.
Okay.
We're just talking back of the envelope, biggest swag in the world, right?
The $50 billion comes.
Right. Yeah. So if we need to add a 1% growth, then we're talking the 4% decline offset plus 1%
plus
growth,
another
so
one.
5 times 50, get to that $250 billion number. So again, that's pretty guess. There's a lot of guesswork in all of that. But that's I think one way to begin to think about what that might be. And that's not to say that in 2022 we see $250 billion being spent, because we're still on the upside of the recovery phase. But I think that's something the folks in the industry could take away as being maybe that's something like a steady state sort of status for the oilfield equipment and service sector.
I think that if you've got the pretty solid potential of seeing a 25% growth in today's overall oilfield equipment and service market, then it's up to you to figure out how to go get your part of that.
Sure.
But I'd far rather have that kind of scenario than what the headline news is screaming out. Because I believe the 1% per year growth for several more years. You and I have come at that so many different ways.
Right.
Nice to see that a government kinda agrees with you at that point. And this would be the Biden administration that came out with this forecast.
Yeah, right. Well,
Under the Biden administration.
It's their energy professionals. So, but the point is that I think that but again, reinforces the point that we need to keep an eagle eye on what's happening legislatively, regulatory standpoint, because but there are still a number of actions that might yet be taken that could bend that demand outlook curve. And we just need to figure out what they are.
One of those would be if, for example, you made it illegal, if you would, to loan money to the oil and gas industry, some way, somehow, then you starve the industry of cash. You make the price of oil go to the moon. Pick some number, $200, $300 a barrel. That would crush the demand. It would cause it to drop.
Well, you get price-induced conversation. Yeah,
exactly. So, but
at least for a while, right? It wouldn't necessarily be a full-time, thing.
Well, that's right. Because if you're a Tulsa, Oklahoma oil company and you're getting $300 a barrel, you're going to go make some more.
Oh, exactly right. And then demand would fall, price would go back down.
Yep.
Demand would recover. It'd be that
little
cycle, just at a different,
a virtuous cycle.
Fair enough.
Hey, you ready for the puzzler?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so this one was sent in by our colleague, David Ott, who, if you'll remember, has a degree in engineering physics.
Oh, so he's a smart guy.
Oh, golly, David's a smart guy.
He's the smartest guy in this room. Yeah.
Who's not in this room.
Okay,
Anyway,
what does he say?
So here's what happened. One day last week, David hopped into his Lexus LX 570.
Okay.
And he was on his way to go on a 2-mile shopping errand for his wife, Pamela.
Okay, yes. Uh-huh.
So for the first mile,
Yes.
he averaged 15 miles an hour.
Okay.
Here's the puzzler.
Yes.
How fast did David have to drive the second mile for the overall trip to average 30 miles an hour? And if you think you know the answer, email drilldownshow@gmail.com, and next week we'll read the name of the winner that we draw at random from what I'm sure will be hundreds of correct answers that I'm completely positive that we'll receive.
Do they all get to take a ride with Dave?
That's right, for that second mile. And that's a clue.
Sounds good. Well, I'll tune in. That's for sure. So anyway, thanks so much for you tuning in this week. This has been The Drill Down, and I'm John Spears.
And I'm Richard Spears.